Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Thomas Steininger. I welcome you to Revolve, our international webcast for consciousness and culture. I'm happy to have with me David Nicol from California, from San Francisco or Berkeley. David, great to have you.
Hi, Thomas. It's great to be here. Thank you.
David, you are founder of the Subtle Activism Network, and you wrote a book called Subtle Activism, The Inner Dimensions of Social and Planetary Transformation, which was the first comprehensive academic treatment of the topic. And you teach subtle activism at the California Institute of Integral Studies. I didn't know that you were an environmental lawyer in Australia before you moved to Berkeley, California. I had no idea.
Long time ago.
Great. I mean, I said it now in your introduction at least 5 times. Your thing is subtle activism. And the reason why I wanted to talk to you next week, Elizabeth Diebold and myself start what we do every year, a 24-hour vigil with people all around the globe, bringing them together to meditate together, to do rituals together, people from different parts, from the global south, from the east, from the west. And we do this as a global ritual, and we see this as a kind of a subtle activism. And as I just told you before we started the broadcast, but you knew this already, that one of the big inspirations for us to do this was your work around subtle activism. So we thought, let's talk with David about subtle activism, what it is, and what it can be. And why don't we start there? Subtle activism sounds very mysterious. What is this?
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Well, it's interesting when you're just describing the vision of One World Bearing Witness and why I love to get involved in that project from the beginning is that it's very much the vision that you just described is very much at the center of the inspiration that I had for developing this concept of subtle activism. And that was essentially this intuition that as we are at this point of evolution where this planetary consciousness, this re-enchanted, re-integrated planetary consciousness is emerging, that practices like a One World Bearing Witness, global rituals where we can experience together our unity, not just think about it, talk about it, but really feel it on a deep level, that does something that has a spiritual significance for the collective, that is actually laying down a certain kind of inner commitment, I think, in the collective psyche to proceed towards this possibility of a more unified world. So that's just to say it's a vision like that was the inspiration. And broadly speaking, how I define subtle activism is simply the use of consciousness-based practices like meditation or prayer or ritual for the purposes of collective transformation. And in many ways, in that respect, it's a pretty simple concept. The main contrast there, of course, is with the use of those sort of practices more for individual benefit, more for individual awakening and transformation, which is really how they have been used in the modern West for the most part up to now. And so it's an encouragement to understand how we can apply those practices, not just for personal transformation, but for social transformation, collective transformation, and especially when we are leveraging the power of our collective coherent consciousness. That's an area I know you and I both share an interest there in the the emergent healing capacities of a coherent group field that can bring through healing powers beyond the sum of the parts, and the sense that that can affect change not just at the individual level, but also seeding change in the collective. So this is the essential idea, and it's the focus on practice as a form of action, practice as having actual effects in the world, effects on collective consciousness, a subtle but I believe crucial form of action as part of a more holistic approach to social change.
That makes a lot of sense. And let me just speak in a very personal way, because we do this One World Bearing Witness the 6th time now. And just speaking for myself, it has changed my relationship to the world. Mm-hmm. And it really did, on a subtle level. Because I'm politically interested, socially interested since many years. And of course, I'm interested in what's happening in the US right now, what's happening in the Global South right now. And this is all kind of things that I'm occupied with since many years. But there's one thing to read about things in the newspaper or watch a TV documentation or a good documentary, whatever, or to be at the same time in the same space with someone from the Philippines, from South Africa, exactly, from California, from Guatemala, from Siberia, and experience that we are witnessing to be together, one humanity belonging to this one earth, which is the title of this year. Mm-hmm. And it is something that you can say, oh, what is this about? But it changes our relationship to our humanness. Yes. It's my understanding of what it means to be human, that I have a deep, directly relationship for people around the world, not as an abstract idea, but as a really relational field that is happening as we are talking. I mean, it's happening right now, just talking with you. In fact, having this interview with you in some way is a form of subtle activism, just to allow to create these direct, powerful relationships. Yeah, and I think to counteract the dynamics of the systems of profit and the systems of abstract bureaucratic domination, let's call it, the one thing that we have is human relationship. And in that sense, I find this a real form of activism.
Absolutely. There is research that the Institute of Noetic Sciences have done that speaks to this point very precisely, actually. And if I remember it, the essence of it is that when you look at what motivates people to take action, why do people invest in building wells for creating water in Africa, for instance? Why do people actually, what motivates people? And what I remember about the research is that they found that motivation through guilt is not very effective or long-lasting. Motivation through experience tends to be what does it. So if you travel to Africa and you form a relationship, as you're saying, with some people there, you actually, you open your heart and you actually feel these people, then you come back completely changed and you want to make an investment. And it's a similar principle here, where there's also, I think, a question of getting, we're such a cognocentric culture. We're so top heavy in terms of our, living in our heads and being very skilled at these arguments that happen at the cognitive level. And to make the shift where you actually experience the real heart communion with someone in the Philippines, with someone in Africa, with someone in the Middle East, and so on, that this is crucial. This is central to creating a foundation for living from that understanding of our actual connection to each other, and the kinds of ideas, the kinds of actions, the kinds of policies that arise from that understanding. It changes everything. So it's at the foundation of a real activism.
Well, you're saying it. Also, the fact that also forms of activism, we usually have a very cognitive relationship to activism. Yeah. And there's also reason for that. I don't want to dismiss the cognitive side of this. Mm-hmm. What we are doing with a One World Bearing Witness is also that we consciously do this as a ritual. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also something that I'll at least learn from you, to really go into the significance of doing rituals together. Mm-hmm. And that's something I think also that we have to learn, and that we have to learn on a global scale, because traditionally we are used to do rituals. I come from a Central European Catholic background. We had a lot of rituals. Right. Even nation states have their own rituals. I mean, the Americans and their relationship to the flag, that's a ritual relationship. And right. It's not only bad, they're powerful things. And it's to acknowledge that ritual is part of the way how we relate to each other, and find new ways. How can we create global rituals that apply to our global humanness, that we are in this way only discovering right now? Because just 10 years ago, we had no chance to relate in this direct way. It was all very, very indirect. So to become relational and find new appropriate rituals creates also new forms of togetherness that I find is not just socially, it's spiritually, it's on a human level, deeply important, and I would guess transformative. And I would love to hear your thoughts on the necessity and the power of ritual in this.
Yeah, well, again, it's where I feel such resonance with, I think it's One World Bearing Witness vision. The need to be creative about new kinds of global rituals. Yes, I think it's right at the center of what we're doing. And one of the ideas that I had around this was that one of the thinkers that I studied was philosopher Richard Tarnas, who's based here in California. And he presented this framework of understanding what's happening in the world, being one where, as if the modern psyche was going through this initiatory rite of passage, and so that collectively we were undergoing this very understandable sort of archetypal process of being separated from the sense of communion with life, being more and more in this sort of isolated place, this sort of dismemberment phase. And most initiations have this sense of encounter with death, with the possibility of destruction, and the sense that you have to go through that portal to emerge on the other side as a elder, or as a mature person, or as a shaman, and so on. But we're doing this together. We're doing this. So one of the interesting things about initiations typically is that there's someone present who is an elder who's been initiated, who holds the space, who is just a point of reference for the person going through the initiation. With the collective initiation we're going through, no one person can do that because we're all going through it together. It's too big. But this is where I speculate that one of the roles that these global rituals can play is that in a sense, it helps to steward the collective psyche through this initiation. It helps to hold space, like the global field takes on, I believe, the role of that elder that is simply holding space that allows the initiatory process to happen, which can involve a descent, it usually does, and can allow the collective psyche to gather the courage to face the descent and to go through it. And then there's something about the planetary fields that we create. They have encoded in them, I think, these seeds of this coming era. Like there's an emergent consciousness that happens in those events that contains a certain wisdom that we're all contributing to, we're all creating together. It's a mysterious thing, I think, right? What happens in these events, but it's real. Some threads of awareness and presence are being created all around the world, and that encoded in that field is this knowing of interconnected consciousness, this knowing of planetary unity, and so I think it contains the wisdom. It can play this role of the wise elder that's holding space. So that's part of what I see as the significance of it, is that there's this profound process of initiation we're going through, and there needs to be some fields that we create together on a global level that contain that wisdom, that presence, that holding, that allows the chaos and everything that to have a sort of, it's a bit like a chrysalis, create the container that allows the meltdown to happen, but with enough trust, just enough trust that we can be connected to the forces of life that can work through that initiation and hopefully take us through to the other side.
To some degree, my experience is also, and it relates what you're just describing, that doing this kind of rituals, these global rituals, is a form of collective space holding. Mm-hmm. There's something where because we are all embedded, when we come and do this together, and usually there are a couple of thousand people who signed up, and at a time there's a couple of hundred people present. So we are together in this, but everyone is embedded in wherever they are. So I'm embedded in the environment here in Central Europe, in Germany. You are embedded in California. Someone else is embedded in the global South. And all this is present. And we are here bearing witness to all of this together. We use a term from Bernie Glassman that basically is kind of a lead term for us, which is bearing witness. And with bearing witness, as Bernie Glassman laid it out, we mean bearing witness to the different dimensions of our humanity that are, because you were talking about passage and transition. I mean, it's hard to deny that we as a globe are going to some kind of transition right now.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, but it's something. Nobody will deny that. We can argue what it is. We can argue if it's something positive will come out or not, but it's a transition, and we are all in, and we are all in the unknown. And we can together bear witness to the fact, just the fact that we can do this together on a global scale in real time does something to us. It changes reality. We are not atomized. We are not kind of fragmented. There's some network of togetherness holding this together.
Yeah.
And also a big part of what we do, and I know a big part of your work also, is meditation, which is whatever kind of is really unraveling and disturbing. There is also a reality that is not touched by that can be with it, but it's not disturbed by this. It's somehow held from a different dimension, and is part of what we can do together to hold the meditation space and the turmoil of our reality right now at the same time together. And just the fact to be able to do this and not to be on each other's throat, for example, is in fact more than a ritual. It's a real social practice.
Absolutely. One of the key events that inspired me to go in the direction of subtle activism was a series of global meditations that I helped to organize in 2004 that was associated with the presidential campaign of Denis Kucinich. And I don't know if listeners will remember that time, but Denis Kucinich ran on a very radical, there's a radical worldview of interconnectedness that was underlying his campaign, and it brought many spiritually minded people out of the woodwork. These were in the Bush years, and it was a strong contrast with what was going on then. And it was this campaign that we did. It was the first time I had participated in a global meditation, and there was something really very profound for me about this confluence of these different dimensions of meaning that happened in those events, because you had the depth of meditation, the profundity of meditation itself. You had the global dimension, because we had a very strong global response. We had people from 70 different countries who participated in these events, and they wrote to us and said that we had this clear awareness of the global field, and we read out the names of all of the countries. And so having the global dimension and that sense of your awareness expanding to connect with people in all these different places, the depth of meditation, and then the significance of the focus being on the US presidential race, which had that worldly power and significance, and those elements coming together. I've experienced a kind of explosion in my being of meaning, and it was actually out of that was one of the main things that got me on the path of doing subtle activism. So yes, there's something about and the global dimension. I don't know about you, but whenever I do an event, see, even when there are relatively few people doing a practice like this, like, let's say, a few hundred people is not that many in the whole scheme of things on one level, but there's something about carrying the intention, holding the awareness of we are meeting together as a global community for the purpose of bearing witness to the reality of all the dimensions that's happening on the earth, good and bad, that it brings in a certain quality of presence, a certain kind of energy that's far more significant than just the numbers, it seems. It's like we're all tapping in together to a certain kind of field that, because of the intentionality we're bringing to it, it's unique, it's different than just meditating by yourself. It's different even than just meditating in a big group in your own city. There's a new quality to it, and I often find it has a particular kind of freshness. There's something I think we're tapping into, which has the energy of the birth of something, the birth of the new era. And there's, even despite all of the obvious suffering and control and all the problems that are in the world, you bring a group of people together with this sort of focus and intentionality, and we can connect with an energy that is fresh, that I think is of the future, and everyone can sense that.
No, I very much agree. I would like to challenge us in this because I agree so much with your experience.
Yeah.
The question comes up, and I'm sure it also comes up with others, is this not just a good collective experience? Isn't this just some form of collective narcissism? I mean, it's undeniable. It's a powerful experience to be together with hundreds of thousands of people around the globe and to hold this space. And it's personally deeply touching for all of us. But is it more than that? If I may also ask you your expertise, your thinking, your research on this, is this more than just, hey, we had a great time with all these people around the globe and it was deeply touching my heart and it was deeply touching your heart? Is it more than that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And on some level, I think it's up to each of us to be sincere about how we engage with it to know the answer to that, because I think it's definitely possible to engage in this sort of way. It's like anything. I think there's no practice, there's no philosophy that cannot be co-opted by the ego, in a sense, for kind of a more cheaper purpose. And it can have its more exalted or real expression. So on some level, I think it's a matter for each of us to be discerning about and sincere about what our motivations are and how we're holding it. And is this an avoidance of other kinds of actions, or is it a true sense of calling like this? Because I certainly believe that there are, what I think this offers is that there are certain people, I think, who clearly are called to contribute in this kind of way, that it is a real contribution. And in some sense, what I like about this possibility is that there are just different types of people who are called to different types of actions. Some are more wired to engage in more confrontative, extroverted sort of actions, and others more have certain kinds of a temperament, but also a skill in being able to contribute at this more subtle level, have a more sensitivity, and they can bring a more healing capacity. They can bring that in service in this way. So in terms of sort of harder evidence about, does this actually make a difference? I always find this, it's a tricky part of the conversation, because I feel like I'm always dancing between wanting to have have it be grounded in what we understand empirically, and at the same time not have it be dominated by a certain empiricism, which I think can be a mismatch for the art of this phenomenon. And so, but there's a way in which I think that the meaningfulness of engaging in this way becomes self-evident when you're deeply immersed in it. And on the deepest level for myself, I honestly feel like it's good enough for me to know that when we engage together in this way, we're bringing through, we're seeding change at a deep level, where we're bringing through a good energy. There was this quote by Hafiz that I used. I'm forgetting it right now. When prayer happens, somewhere something good happens. It's like to engage in a too positivistic mindset can be a problem, I think. Having said that, as you know, in my book, I did look at the research on what's been studied in terms of the effect of group meditation on social parameters. And at the end of the day, the research that the researchers associated with the TM movement have done on this is quite convincing. You know, it is rigorous research. They've done a lot of it. They've found that basically when you get a large group of people together in meditation, doing TM practice in their studies, that there are these consistent effects on indicators of social harmony, increased social harmony in nearby groups. And they've done this research over decades. They've done it in many different places. It's been published in, you know, dozens of peer-reviewed papers. And I think you have to give it its due. It's real science. One of the interesting studies that they did was they looked at a large group meditation. They looked at a number of people in the town where the meditation was taking place who were not part of the meditation, and they measured their physiology for signs of stress, and they measured their cortisol levels. And what they found was that on days when the meditation group was strongest, or the largest, that these people who were not even part of the meditation, their cortisol levels of excretion went down, which is a sign of, you know, less stress. So they've done lots of, you know, interesting research like that backs up our intuitions on this. And then, of course, there's like a century and a half of parapsychology research, which also shows a lot of interesting support for the possibility of non-local connections between people. So, you know, there is all of that research that's there. I find it depends on your temperament in terms of how much there are certain people who really like to go into that empirical side, that to have the kind of left brain rational side sort of taken care of along with our intuitions. I probably fall a little bit more on the right brain side, but I like to know about that as well.
In fact, I like both sides of your answer, because there is this part where relying just on empiricist materialist study and a scientific methodology is limiting something. It's right. Like you can ask the same question: is it valid to have a good friendship?
Right.
And is having friends, developing friends, not just something narcissistic? And right. You can make arguments about it, but it's kind of evokes fear also, because it can be. At the same time, I think it's also good to be in some way rigorous, and also yes. to test oneself.
Yes.
If there are also kind of empiricist signs that this is more than just my inner experience. Yeah. But in the end, I think you hit it in the very beginning of your answer. It's very much dependent on us what we make out of it.
Right. Right.
And I can, out of a good friendship, to just use this example, I can make something that's very narcissistic, but a good friendship can be a powerful mean of transformation. In fact, right. For community and for society. And that's just a fact. It depends where we go with it.
Right.
A couple of weeks ago, I had an interview also in the radio with Gail Bradbrook, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. Mm-hmm. And she herself being, in fact, impressive spiritual human being. I was very impressed by her. But she also had this hesitation about subtle activism, because of course Extinction Rebellion is about civil obedience, is about really going out there, disturbing society. She's right now organizing tech strike and things like that, very real things. But also she's not denying that these more subtle parts of activism are crucial, because otherwise we are not able to do this with our hearts.
Yeah, well, I would add to that as well. A central part of what needs to happen in the world today is the shift in consciousness. It's in the sense that if you look at what's being called the meta crisis, right? These multiple different interconnected dimensions of this global crisis that we're facing, and it's complicated, of course, in many ways. But really at the root of it, I think it's fair to say, is this consciousness of separation from each other, from the earth, from the cosmos. And so we're not, I think this is a very crucial thing, simple and crucial, is that we're not going to be able to just engineer our way out of the meta crisis while staying in the default consciousness of separation. And yet that is still what most of our society is trying to do. Is this still, there's this assumption, I think, that our intelligence, that we can, you know, create some sort of technology that will get us out of it without having necessarily to create that shift. It's not necessarily that I see these realms as totally distinct. You know, the consciousness shift also can be brought about by different creative technologies, and vice versa. As we shift in consciousness, we can bring through different technologies. But I think the crucial point is it's foundational to what needs to happen. You know, I think it's a holistic solution pattern to the meta crisis is the shift in consciousness, where we realize our interconnection. And so to see that this is not just a nice new age idea. This is not just a narcissistic thing that a few people can do. This is actually really powerful and central to what needs to happen. And that if that is recognized and thereby allowing that idea and that practice to become more and more into the center of culture, where that shift can happen, it's a very potent central pillar of what needs to take place in this transition. So, you know, there's often, I think, this tension between philosophies that have arisen out of a more materialistic sort of worldview, and others that have come from a more spiritual worldview, about what's real action. I don't think that they're ultimately, you know, that it's such a harsh dichotomy between one or the other. But I do challenge this notion that this sort of action is just ephemeral or peripheral, or, you know, I really think it's the most powerful thing we can do, that if we make that shift, that it's at the center of the change that needs to happen and is happening on the planet.
In fact, I think you hit a very central point here, because if you just take into consideration that a lot of the meta crisis that we are facing right now is rooted in a technological relationship to reality,
right?
then if this is the case, and I think there's a strong argument that one can say this, that our technological relationship with our modernist Western uh, enlightened culture is at the root of many of the things that are going wrong right now. If that's the case, the relationship that we have to each other is crucial. It's not peripheral. So this comes back also to a ritual like one world bearing witness, being not just a technology of doing something, but having a different relationship to each other that has a different logic, the logic of ritual, the logic of connection, and not the consciousness of the technology of something.
Yeah.
And to practice this together
Mm-hmm.
changes the way we perceive reality and how we act in reality. And I think you can make a strong argument that this is crucial for our collective response as society to find solutions to the meta crisis. So to practice this together on a global scale is central to the change that we need.
Absolutely. And one of the features of our work in recent years has been emphasizing this connection with each other, but also with the earth, and building into these meditations and rituals, these elements where that experience that becomes at the forefront of our awareness, that it can be a profound shift when we, and what I found is it's very significant to do this together as a group, because often in modern societies, a lot of people, of course, naturally have a profound connection with nature, but it's almost like you have to have it in private. Like you steal away to the forest and isn't this so beautiful? But if some strangers come walking by, you kind of pull it in. Like if you're having a deep moment of loving connection with a tree or something like that, you don't want to seem weird. But when we together open our awareness, offer our shared love, say, to the forest, to the rivers, and so on, it creates this, it does something, it creates a bond, and it's between us as a social group, as a collective group, and that, so it's laying down this track. It's sort of like a template for a cultural shift where we can together actually remember that we do know it's not illogical that we are connected to the natural world, but to feel it, to give ourselves permission to actually experience that shift together. Well, that kind of shift, I think, is very central to specifically the environmental movement, where if that kind of experience is shared by more and more people, again, the power of the motivation that brings to initiate changes in how we relate to the earth, which we all know we need. But again, if it comes just from a technical perspective or a top-down guilt-ridden perspective, that's not where the power, I think, is going to be in terms of the changes that we need to make.
Again, I very much agree, and I want to point out one specific aspect that I find very fascinating and touching, particularly related to a global ritual like One World Bearing Witness. Because one of my experiences that it changed dramatically my direct relationship to Earth. Because we all, I guess we all have kind of this relationship when we go into nature and there's a tree and there's a forest and there's a creek and there's a mountain. But there's something that Earth as such quite often stays abstract.
Yeah.
But having, and I experienced this again and again, having people around the globe being together, being aware of Earth right now as we are together, and being aware that we are sitting on different spots of this ball called Earth. There's a central relationship to the wholeness of Earth in its aliveness, in her aliveness, that changed at least my relationship to her.
Yeah.
It's not an idea Earth,
Yeah.
because this consciousness points around her, and we're together in being with our experience of Earth. The global Earth experience becomes something that penetrated me in a way it has not penetrated me otherwise. And just for this is a powerful thing to do together, because it changes our relationship as a human race
Yeah.
to Earth and being on Earth and with Earth.
I know exactly what you mean. I've had similar experiences like that, and one of the practices that has emerged for me in the last couple of years that came sort of spontaneously was more and more I've been developing a relationship with nature as my teacher, and would go to the forest and sit by a tree in meditation. And there's a common practice in indigenous traditions where you take something as an offering, right, to develop your relationship. It could be some piece of food or something like that. And I didn't have anything with me, and I had this just impulse to offer to the tree this essence of we had done a group meditation in this group I was running, where we created together this flame of truth, the love of truth that each one of us had. We brought together and created this beautiful flame of truth, and it just came to me, well, I'll offer that to the tree. And so I gave that to the tree, and then I had this experience. It was like something left me which I had never experienced, but some ordinary veil, or like separating part of my consciousness, just dissolved, just dropped away. And then I felt more than I ever had, just this sudden simple unity with the tree. It was just, we were friends. It was just this, and there was something about that act, and there's something about not it just being me, but it's the group that is involved. It's not just my mind and trying to, it's like there's something about doing it with the group that is significant. And I do think that it relates to, like, in indigenous cultures, you had a worldview in the culture that was constantly supporting people to live in that reality where you're interconnected with all of nature. You're constantly getting reflected back by everyone around you and the rituals that they did, that this is reality, and so you can live together in that experience of knowing nature. Whereas in our modern culture, of course, there's no support for that, or you're seen as, even if intellectually there's an understanding of that, to actually live the communion with nature is not socially supported. It's seen as somehow you're regressing to some magical sort of way of being or something like that. But that's why I think these sort of practices provide that, again, cultural space, cultural support and permission to re-enter into that knowing, which is natural and real and beautiful and important for where we need to go.
David, we are at the end of our time here.
Yeah.
Just again, thank you so much for inspiring us to start also One World Bearing Witness. For everyone who wants to join us, we are doing this on the 5th and 6th of December, 24 hours online. You can go to our website, oneworldindialogue.com, and find there One World Bearing Witness. And David, again, thank you so much for the inspiration, and also thank you for your research work in this kind of work. I think it's important, And I very much enjoyed talking with you about this.
You too, Thomas. It's a great pleasure, as always, to connect with you. And I love what you guys are doing with One World Bearing Witness. So thank you so much.
Thank you.